The dust hung thick in the air as Gabriella Hayes clutched her shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders, her eyes darting at every flicker of movement that crossed her path. The journey to Austin had been treacherous enough, but now, standing alone at the edge of the bustling Texas town in 1876, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake in fleeing Virginia with nothing but a carpetbag of memories and broken promises. "Miss, you look like you could use some assistance," a deep voice called from behind. Gabriella jumped, a small gasp escaping her lips as she whirled around, nearly losing her footing in the process. A tall man atop a chestnut stallion looked down at her, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. The setting sun cast his shadow long across the dirt road, merging with her own smaller one. "I'm perfectly fine, sir," she replied, her voice betraying her fear despite her efforts to sound composed. Her eyes couldn't help but track the way their shadows danced together on the ground, his strong and steady, hers quivering like a leaf in autumn. The stranger dismounted with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. As he approached, Gabriella could see his features more clearly, a strong jaw dusted with stubble, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a kind smile that seemed at odds with his weathered appearance. "Preston Novak," he said, tipping his hat. "Town Marshal of Austin, and forgive my bluntness, madam, but you don't look fine. You look terrified of your own shadow." Gabriella's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Is it that obvious?" she whispered, her eyes darting nervously to the lengthening shadows as the sun continued its descent. "I'm afraid of my own shadow," she trembled, her voice barely audible above the sounds of the town. The cowboy's expression softened. His eyes, which had seemed piercing moments before, now held a gentleness that made Gabriella's racing heart slow just slightly. "Then stand in my light instead," he said, moving to position himself between her and the setting sun. His larger frame blocked the harsh rays, enveloping her in a protective shade. It was a simple gesture, yet profoundly comforting. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach in Austin, Gabriella felt the tightness in her chest ease. "Thank you, Marshal Novak," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I'm Gabriella Hayes. I've just arrived from Virginia." "What brings you to Austin, Miss Hayes?" he asked, gathering his horse's reins in one hand while offering to carry her carpetbag with the other. Gabriella hesitated. How could she explain that she was running from a past that threatened to consume her? That every shadow held the specter of a man who had promised to love her but had shown only cruelty, a fresh start, she said simply, surrendering her bag to his outstretched hand. Preston nodded, not pressing for details. "Well, you've picked a good place for it. Austin's growing fast, but it's still got heart. Do you have some place to stay?" "The Magnolia boarding house. I have a letter." She fumbled in her pocket for the creased paper that had been her beacon of hope for the exhausting journey. "Mrs. Tillman's place." "She's good people," Preston confirmed. "I can escort you there if you'd like." Relief washed over Gabriella, though caution still kept her wary. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose." "No imposition. I was headed that way anyhow," he said, though his direction before intercepting her had clearly been opposite. As they walked through the streets of Austin, Gabriella noticed how people greeted the marshal with genuine respect. Children waved excitedly, shopkeepers nodded deferentially, and even the rough-looking men lounging outside the saloon straightened when he passed. "Have you been marshal long?" she asked, trying to distract herself from the gathering darkness as twilight descended. 5 years now," Preston replied. "Took over after my predecessor decided bullets were flying too close for comfort." "And you weren't deterred by that," a smile tugged at his lips. "I reckon every man's got his purpose. Keeping the peace here is mine." They reached the boarding house, a tidy two-story building with lace curtains and a wrap-around porch. Before they could climb the steps, the door swung open to reveal a plump woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes. "Preston Novak, what trouble are you bringing to my doorstep now?" she called, though her tone was warm. "No trouble, Mrs. Tillman. Just escorting your newest boarder," he replied, gesturing to Gabriella. Mrs. Tillman's face brightened. "Miss Hayes, I was beginning to worry. Your letter said you'd arrive on yesterday's coach." "There was a delay in Dallas," Gabriella explained. "A broken wheel." "Well, you're here now, and that's what matters. Come in, come in. I've got supper still warm on the stove and your room's all ready." Preston set Gabriella's bag down on the porch. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Tillman's capable hands then." Gabriella felt an unexpected pang of disappointment at his departure. "Thank you for your assistance, Marshal." He tipped his hat once more. "My pleasure, Miss Hayes." He hesitated, then added, "If you find yourself in need of anything, my office is just off Main Street. Or you can usually find me at the Bluebird Cafe around noon." "I'll remember that," she promised. As she watched him mount his horse and ride away, Mrs. Tillman appeared at her side. "That's a good man there," she said softly. "Best marshal this town's seen in a generation." Gabriella nodded, watching until Preston's silhouette disappeared into the gathering dusk. "He seems to be," she agreed, surprised at how much she meant it. Mrs. Tillman ushered her inside, chattering about meal times and house rules. The boarding house was clean and comfortable, with polished wooden floors and the lingering scent of beeswax and fresh bread. After a hearty meal of beef stew and cornbread, Gabriella was shown to a small but pleasant room on the second floor. Alone at last, she unpacked her few belongings, placing her mother's silver hairbrush on the dresser and tucking her father's pocket watch beneath her pillow. The journey had been long, and exhaustion pulled at her limbs, but sleep remained elusive as her mind replayed the day's events. Preston Novak's words echoed in her thoughts. "Then stand in my light instead." Such a simple phrase, yet it had calmed her racing heart when nothing else could. As she finally drifted towards sleep, Gabriella wondered if perhaps, in this dusty Texas town, she might finally outrun the shadows that had chased her so far from home. Morning came with the cheerful sounds of Mrs. Tillman bustling in the kitchen below and the distant crow of a rooster. Gabriella rose, washed her face in the basin provided, and dressed in her second-best dress, a modest blue cotton with white piping that had seen better days, but was still presentable. At breakfast, she met the other boarders. A schoolteacher named Miss Winters, an elderly gentleman who introduced himself as Dr. Finch, and a young clerk from the Mercantile, Thomas Garrett. They were welcoming but not intrusive, asking about her journey but not her reasons for undertaking it. "I'm looking for employment," Gabriella mentioned as she buttered a slice of toast. "I've experience as a seamstress and some skill with bookkeeping." "Patterson's General Store might be hiring," Thomas offered. "Old Mr. Patterson's eyesight isn't what it used to be, and his ledgers are in a state. And Martha at the dress shop was just saying she could use another pair of hands," Miss Winters added. "Spring weddings are coming, and she's swamped with orders." Gabriella thanked them both, grateful for the leads. After breakfast, she set out to explore the town properly in the daylight. Austin was larger than she'd expected, with wide streets and a mix of wooden structures and more permanent buildings of brick and stone. The state capitol dominated the skyline, its construction still ongoing but impressive nonetheless. She passed a schoolhouse, several churches, numerous saloons, and a variety of shops before finding Patterson's General Store. The bell above the door jingled as she entered. An older man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from behind the counter. "Good morning, miss. What can I help you find today?" Gabriella straightened her shoulders. Actually, sir, I heard you might be in need of assistance with your books. I have experience with bookkeeping, and did Thomas send you? The man interrupted, his expression brightening. He mentioned the position, yes. Mr. Patterson sighed with relief. That boy has more sense than I gave him credit for. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and these figures swim something terrible. Can you start today? Surprised by the immediate offer, Gabriella nodded. I can, Mr. Patterson. Wonderful. Let me show you the back room where all the ledgers are kept. The back room was little more than a closet with a small desk and shelves overflowing with disorganized account books. Gabriella stifled a gasp at the chaos. I know it's a mess, Mr. Patterson said apologetically. Been meaning to sort it for months. Pays $3 a week, and you can take Sundays off, of course. It wasn't much, but it would cover her room and board at Mrs. Tillman's with a bit left over. That will be fine, Mr. Patterson. I'll have these in order before you know it. The morning passed quickly as Gabriella familiarized herself with the store's accounting system or lack thereof. By noon, her stomach was growling, reminding her she hadn't packed a lunch. Go on and take your midday break, Mr. Patterson encouraged. Hours plenty of time to get something at the cafe. The Bluebird Cafe. Preston had mentioned he took his lunch there. Before she could second-guess herself, Gabriella was smoothing her skirts and heading out the door. The cafe was bustling with the midday crowd, ranchers, businessmen, and townspeople all gathered for the daily special advertised on a chalkboard outside. Beef stew and fresh biscuits. Gabriella hesitated in the doorway, scanning the room for a familiar face. Miss Hayes. The deep voice came from a table in the corner. Preston Novak stood, waving her over. I was hoping I might see you here. Gabriella made her way through the crowded room, conscious of curious glances from other patrons. Marshal Novak, it's good to see you again. Please join me, he offered, pulling out a chair. Unless you're meeting someone else. No, I'm alone, she admitted, taking the seat. I started work at Patterson's this morning, and Mr. Patterson suggested I come here for lunch. Patterson's? That's wonderful. Old man Patterson's a fair employer. What are you doing for him? Bookkeeping, she replied. Though book chaos organizing might be a more accurate description. Preston chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. That sounds about right. I don't think those ledgers have seen proper attention since Mrs. Patterson passed 3 years ago. A waitress approached, setting a steaming bowl before Preston and turning to Gabriella with a friendly smile. What'll it be for you, miss? The stew, please. Coming right up. Coffee. Yes, thank you. As the waitress departed, Gabriella became aware of Preston studying her. You look more rested today, he observed. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in some time, she admitted. Mrs. Tillman's boarding house is quite comfortable. And less frightening in the daylight. His tone was gentle, teasing without mockery. Gabriella felt her cheeks warm. About yesterday, I must have seemed quite the foolish girl. Not foolish, Preston disagreed. Wary, perhaps, and there's nothing wrong with caution in a new place. Her stew arrived, saving her from having to respond immediately. The rich aroma made her stomach growl audibly, and she blushed deeper. Eat, Preston encouraged. We can talk after. Maggie's stew is the best in 3 counties. The meal was indeed delicious, and Gabriella found herself relaxing as they ate in companionable silence. When they'd finished, Preston ordered coffee for them both, and the conversation flowed more easily. What brought you west, if you don't mind my asking? Preston inquired. It's a long way from Virginia. Gabriella hesitated, stirring her coffee slowly. I needed a change, she said finally. After my parents passed last year, there was little left for me in Charlottesville. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Her parents' deaths had left her vulnerable, dependent on the charity of relatives who saw her as little more than free labor. And then there had been Edward, with his charming smile and empty promises. "I'm sorry for your loss," Preston said, interrupting her dark thoughts. "Losing family is never easy." "No, it isn't." She looked up to find his gray eyes studying her with unexpected compassion. "But Austin seems like a good place to make a new start." "It is," Preston agreed. "I came here after the war with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back. Now it's home." "You fought in the war?" Gabriella asked, realizing suddenly that he would have been just old enough. A shadow passed over his face. "Confederate cavalry. Not something I'm particularly proud of now, but I was young and foolish, thought I was fighting for states' rights and honor." He shook his head. "Found out pretty quick it was about neither." His honesty surprised her. In Virginia, men still spoke of the War of Northern Aggression with bitter pride. "That must have been difficult," she said softly. "War's always difficult. Coming home can be harder." He seemed about to say more when the cafe door burst open and a young deputy rushed in. "Marshal, there's trouble at Diamond Jim's. Calloway's drunk again, threatening to shoot anybody who looks at him wrong." Preston sighed, pushing back from the table. "Duty calls." "I'm sorry to cut this short, Miss Hayes." "Of course," Gabriella said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Thank you for sharing your table." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and placed a coin on the table. "For your meal, and perhaps. Would you consider having dinner with me tomorrow evening? Properly, I mean. There's a decent restaurant on Congress Avenue." The invitation caught her off guard. Yes, I'd like that." A smile broke across his face, transforming his serious features. "I'll call for you at the boarding house." 7 o'clock. 7 would be fine. He tipped his hat and strode out, following his anxious deputy. Gabriella watched him go, a curious mixture of excitement and trepidation settling in her stomach. Back at Patterson's, she threw herself into her work, organizing receipts and updating ledgers with such efficiency that by closing time, Mr. Patterson was looking at her like she'd performed a miracle. "You're a godsend, Miss Hayes," he declared. "I can actually make sense of last month's figures now. Please tell me you'll be back tomorrow." "Of course, Mr. Patterson. We've only just started getting things in order." She returned to the boarding house with her spirits higher than they'd been in months. At dinner, she found herself sharing news of her day and her upcoming dinner engagement with the other boarders. "Marshal Novak, eh?" Dr. Finch said, his eyes twinkling. "He's a good man. Patched him up more than once after he's broken up fights at those saloons." "He's quite handsome, too," Miss Winters added with a meaningful smile. "Half the unmarried ladies in town have set their caps for him, but he's never seemed interested." "It's just dinner," Gabriella protested, though her pulse quickened at the thought. "Of course, dear Mrs. Tillman said, passing the potatoes. "Though I will say, I've never known Preston to invite a lady to Rousseau's before. That's the French place on Congress Avenue. Very fancy." Later, alone in her room, Gabriella opened her carpet bag and assessed her limited wardrobe. Her best dress, a green silk with modest lace trim, had been carefully packed away. She shook out the wrinkles and hung it by the window, hoping the night air would refresh the fabric. As she prepared for bed, Gabriella caught herself humming a simple tune her mother used to sing. The realization brought tears to her eyes. It had been so long since she'd felt anything resembling happiness or anticipation. "Don't be a fool," she whispered to herself. "One act of kindness doesn't make him different from other men." Yet as she drifted off to sleep, it was Preston's gentle gray eyes and his words, "Stand in my light instead," that followed her into dreams. The next day passed in a blur of numbers and receipts at Patterson's. Gabriella worked through lunch, too nervous about the evening ahead to face the Bluebird Cafe again. By the time she returned to the boarding house, she barely had an hour to prepare. Mrs. Tillman was waiting for her, an eager gleam in her eye. "I've drawn you a bath with some of my lavender salts," she announced. "No arguments, every lady deserves to feel special for an evening out." Touched by the kindness, Gabriella accepted gratefully. The warm bath soothed her tired muscles, and the lavender scent brought back memories of her mother's garden. Dressing carefully in the green silk, she pinned her dark hair into a simple but elegant style, letting a few curls frame her face. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman she hardly recognized, eyes bright with anticipation rather than shadowed with fear. At precisely 7 o'clock, Mrs. Tillman's voice called up the stairs. "Miss Hayes, your gentleman caller has arrived." Taking a deep breath, Gabriella descended the stairs. Preston stood in the entryway, hat in hand. He traded his usual attire for a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His hair, usually hidden beneath his hat, was neatly combed, revealing strands of gold among the brown. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice catching slightly. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "You look quite handsome yourself, Marshal." "Preston, please," he corrected gently. "At least when I'm not wearing the badge, Mrs." Tillman watched their exchange with undisguised delight. "Don't keep her out too late, Preston Novak," she cautioned, though her tone was teasing. "Young ladies need their rest." "Yes, madam," he agreed solemnly, offering his arm to Gabriella. "Shall we?" Outside, Gabriella was surprised to see a smart buggy waiting instead of his horse. "I borrowed it from the livery," Preston explained, helping her up. "Didn't think it proper to ask you to ride behind me on Thunder, though he'd have been on his best behavior." The restaurant was indeed fancy by Austin standards: white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and a waiter who spoke with a genuine French accent. Gabriella felt eyes on them as they were seated, and she leaned closer to Preston. "People are staring," she whispered. "That's because you're the most beautiful woman in the room," he replied, then flushed slightly. "I'm sorry, that was forward of me." "No," she said quickly. "It was lovely, thank you." Over a dinner of beef bourguignon and potatoes dauphinoise, they talked more freely than they had at the café. Preston spoke of growing up on a small ranch outside San Antonio, of losing his father young and helping his mother raise his 3 younger siblings. "They're all married now, scattered across Texas. My mother lives with my sister in Dallas. I try to visit a few times a year." "That's wonderful that you're still close," Gabriella said sincerely. "Family is precious." "It is," he agreed. "What about your family? You mentioned your parents passed, but do you have siblings?" Gabriella shook her head. "I was an only child. My father was a professor at the university, and my mother taught piano. After they died, influenza took them both within days of each other. I stayed with my father's brother and his wife for a time." Her voice faltered. "It wasn't ideal." Preston's expression darkened. "Did they mistreat you?" "Not exactly. They provided shelter and food but made it clear it was charity, not familial obligation." She twisted her napkin in her lap. "My aunt had me working as an unpaid servant, essentially, and then there was their son, Edward." She trailed off, realizing she'd said more than she intended. "Edward," Preston prompted gently. Gabriella took a sip of water, buying time. "My cousin. He had expectations that I couldn't meet." Understanding dawned in Preston's eyes. "Is he the reason you left Virginia?" For a moment, Gabriella considered deflecting the question, offering a sanitized version of events as she had with others. But something about Preston's steady gaze encouraged honesty. "Partly," she admitted. "Edward fancied himself in love with me, though I suspect it was more about control than affection." When I refused his advances, he became insistent. My aunt and uncle sided with him, of course. They suggested I should be grateful for his interest. She took a shaky breath. The night I left, he'd been drinking. He cornered me in the kitchen, said if I wouldn't willingly be his wife, he'd make sure no other man would want me. Preston's hand clenched around his fork. Did he hurt you? No, she said quickly. At least not the way you're thinking. I managed to get away, packed what I could carry, and slipped out before dawn. I had a small inheritance. My parents had left me money my uncle couldn't touch. I used it for the train ticket west. That took courage, Preston said, his voice low and intense. Many would have submitted to such pressure. Gabriella looked down at her plate. I don't feel courageous. Most days I feel like I'm still running, still afraid. That's why you said you were afraid of your shadow, he realized. You've been looking over your shoulder for so long, expecting him to be there. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Preston reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. Gabriella, he said, the first time he'd used her given name, I want you to know something. You're safe here, and not just because I'm the marshal. He smiled slightly. Though that doesn't hurt. Thank you, she whispered, finally meeting his gaze, for understanding, for not judging. I'd be a poor excuse for a man if I judged someone for seeking safety and a better life. His fingers finally brushed hers, a touch so light it might have been imagined. Now, how about we talk of happier things? Have you tried Mrs. Tillman's peach cobbler yet? The rest of the evening passed pleasantly, the heavy conversation giving way to lighter topics. Preston told her about the colorful characters of Austin. From the eccentric judge who insisted on wearing his wife's knitted scarves year-round to the old prospector who swore he'd found gold in Shoal Creek, but would show his map to no one. By the time they left the restaurant, Gabriella felt lighter than she had in years. The night air was crisp, but not cold, and the stars shone brightly above them as Preston drove the buggy slowly back toward the boarding house. I had a wonderful time, Gabriella said as they pulled up in front of Mrs. Tillman's. Thank you for a lovely evening. The pleasure was mine, Preston replied, helping her down from the buggy. I'd like to see you again if you're amenable. I'd like that too, she admitted, her heart fluttering at the warmth in his eyes. He walked her to the door, keeping a respectful distance. When they reached the porch, he took her hand gently in his. Good night, Gabriella. Sleep well. Good night, Preston. For a moment, he looked as though he might say more, but instead, he simply squeezed her hand once before releasing it. She watched from the doorway as he returned to the buggy and drove away, her fingers still tingling from his touch. Inside, Mrs. Tillman was waiting up, pretending to mend a tablecloth, though her eager expression gave away her true purpose. Did you have a nice evening, dear? She asked, failing to sound casual. Very nice, Gabriella confirmed, unable to suppress a smile. Preston looked quite dashing in his suit, Mrs. Tillman observed. And you two made such a handsome couple. We're hardly a couple after one dinner, Mrs. Tillman. The older woman smiled knowingly. Perhaps not yet, but I've known Preston Novak for 5 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Gabriella felt her cheeks grow warm. He's been kind, that's all. If you say so, dear, Mrs. Tillman replied, clearly unconvinced. Either way, I'm glad to see you smiling. You have a lovely smile, you know. You should use it more often. Upstairs, Gabriella carefully hung up her green dress and changed into her nightgown. As she brushed her hair, she found herself humming again, the same tune from the night before. This time, the realization didn't bring tears, but a sense of healing, as though a wound long festering had finally begun to close. The next few weeks established a pattern that brought unexpected joy to Gabriella's life. Her days were spent at Patterson's, where she had transformed the chaotic bookkeeping into an orderly system that even Mr. Patterson could navigate. He'd shown his appreciation by raising her weekly wage to $4 without her having to ask. Her evenings and Sundays often included Preston's company. Sometimes they dined together. Other times they simply walked through the town or sat on Mrs. Tillman's porch, talking until the stars came out. He never pressed for more than she offered, physically or emotionally. Yet Gabriella found herself increasingly drawn to his steady presence. She learned that Preston had scars of his own not just from the war, but from a childhood marked by his father's sudden death and the struggle to help his mother keep their small ranch. He'd sold the property after his siblings were grown, using his portion to put himself through a year of law studies before deciding his calling lay in more practical applications of justice. "I wasn't cut out for law books and courtrooms," he explained one evening as they walked along Shoal Creek. "I needed to be doing something more immediate." "So you became a lawman," Gabriella finished for him. "It suits you." "Most days," he agreed, "though I won't deny there are times I wonder if I'm making any difference at all. Drunks still get drunk, thieves still steal, and men still fight over cards and women. But they know there are consequences," Gabriella pointed out. "That matters, Preston. The town respects you. I've seen it." He smiled down at her, his gray eyes warming. "Thank you for that. It's good to be reminded." As March gave way to April, Austin bloomed with wildflowers, and Gabriella found herself flourishing just as surely. The nightmares that had plagued her after leaving Virginia grew less frequent. She gained weight, filling out the hollows that fear and anxiety had carved in her cheeks, and she laughed a sound so foreign to her own ears that it startled her the first time. Preston provoked it with a dry observation about the mayor's pompous new waistcoat. One Sunday in late April, Preston invited her on a picnic outside of town. "There's a spot by the river that's particularly pretty this time of year," he said. "The bluebonnets are at their peak." They rode in the borrowed buggy, following the Colorado River until they reached a gentle slope overlooking the water. True to Preston's word, the hillside was a sea of blue, punctuated by bright splashes of Indian paintbrush and Mexican hat flowers. "It's beautiful," Gabriella breathed, taking in the vista as Preston spread a blanket beneath the shade of a live oak. "It reminds me of your eyes," he said softly. "That particular shade of blue." Their picnic was simple but delicious: fried chicken prepared by Mrs. Tillman, fresh bread, apple tarts, and a jug of cool lemonade. They ate in companionable silence, watching the river flow lazily below them. "I've been thinking," Preston said as they finished the meal, "about what you told me that night at Rouso's." Gabriella tensed slightly. "About Edward." "About being afraid, looking over your shoulder." He shifted to face her more directly. "Do you still feel that way?" She considered the question honestly. "Not as much," she admitted. "There are still moments, shadows that startle me, nightmares sometimes, but they're less frequent now." "I'm glad," he said, reaching for her hand. It had become a familiar gesture between them, this tentative joining of fingers. "Gabriella, I want you to know that I would never do anything to make you feel afraid. Not of me, not of the future." Her heart quickened at the intensity in his voice. "I know that, Preston. Do you?" His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "Because I find myself wanting to be more than your friend, and I need to be certain that's something you might want too." The directness of his words stole her breath momentarily. "More than friends," she repeated, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves and flowing water. "If you need more time, or if your feelings don't match mine, I'll understand," Preston continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. The last thing I want is to pressure you in any way." Gabriella looked down at their joined hands as large and calloused from years of hard work, hers smaller but equally marked by labor. When had his touch become so essential to her peace of mind? "Preston," she said, meeting his gaze with newfound courage, "my feelings do match yours. I never expected to find someone like you, especially not so soon after." "After Edward," he finished for her. "I understand if his shadow still falls between us sometimes." The phrase struck her forcefully. Edward's shadow. That was exactly what had been holding her back, not fear of Preston, but fear of trusting her own judgment again. "I don't want that," she said firmly. "I don't want him to have that power anymore." "What do you want, Gabriella?" Preston asked, the question hanging between them like a tangible thing. "I want to stand in your light," she answered, echoing his words from their first meeting. "I want to see where this path leads. With you." The smile that broke across Preston's face was like sunrise after the longest night. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward until their foreheads touched. "May I kiss you?" he whispered, his breath warm against her lips. In answer, Gabriella closed the remaining distance between them. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, yet it ignited something in her that she'd never felt before, not desire alone, but a sense of rightness, of coming home after a long journey. When they finally parted, Preston's eyes remained closed for a moment, as though savoring the sensation. When he opened them, the emotion Gabriella saw there made her breath catch. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Gabriella Hayes," he said simply. Tears sprang to her eyes, not of sorrow but of surprised joy. "I think I'm falling in love with you too, Preston Novak." They remained by the river until late afternoon, talking, occasionally sharing soft kisses, and planning tentatively for a future that suddenly seemed full of possibility rather than dread. As they drove back toward Austin, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Gabriella watched the shadows lengthening across the road and realized with quiet amazement that they no longer filled her with apprehension. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "That I'm not afraid of shadows anymore," she replied. "At least, not when I'm with you." He smiled, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her knuckles without taking his eyes from the road. "Good. Because I intend to be with you for a very long time, Gabriella Hayes, if you'll have me." The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Gabriella's life. Spring deepened into summer, bringing longer days and warm evenings perfect for strolls along the creek or sitting on Mrs. Tillman's porch swing. Her relationship with Preston blossomed publicly, becoming the subject of approving gossip throughout Austin. "It's about time that boy settled down," Dr. Finch commented one evening at dinner. "Been telling him for years he needs a good woman to come home to." "Now, Doctor, Mrs. Tillman scolded, though her eyes twinkled. "Don't go rushing them. These things take their natural course." Gabriella merely smiled, too content to be embarrassed by their gentle teasing. She had flourished in other ways, too. Mr. Patterson had promoted her from bookkeeper to assistant manager, recognizing her knack for organization and her way with customers. She'd made friends among the other shopkeepers and had even joined the Ladies' Aid Society that met weekly at the Methodist Church. One particularly hot July evening, Preston arrived at the boarding house looking unusually serious. "Could we take a walk?" he asked, foregoing their usual greeting kiss. Concern flickered through Gabriella. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Just need to talk to you about something important," he replied, offering his arm. They walked in silence to the small public gardens near the Capitol building, finding a secluded bench beneath a spreading oak. The evening was still sweltering, but a slight breeze made it bearable. "You're worrying me," Gabriella said when Preston remained silent, his hat turning slowly in his hands. "Has something happened?" He took a deep breath. "I received a letter today from Virginia." Cold dread washed through her. Virginia. "Who would write to you from?" Understanding dawned, and she felt the blood drain from her face. "Edward." Preston nodded grimly. "Not directly. It's from a lawyer in Richmond representing Edward Hayes. Apparently, your cousin has been searching for you since you left." "What does he want?" Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "He claims to be concerned for your welfare," Preston said, his tone making it clear he believed nothing of the sort. "The lawyer writes that your family is eager to have you home, that they fear you left under a misapprehension of their intentions." A bitter laugh escaped Gabriella. "A misapprehension? Is that what they're calling it now?" "There's more," Preston continued reluctantly. "Edward apparently told them you were engaged before you left, that you had accepted his proposal but fled after an argument." "That's a lie." Gabriella stood abruptly, her hands clenched into fists. "I never accepted him, never encouraged him in any way." "I believe you," Preston said firmly, rising to take her trembling hands in his. "Gabriella, look at me. I never doubted your word for a moment." She forced herself to meet his gaze, finding nothing but steady support there. "How did they find me?" "The letter doesn't say. My guess is they may have traced the ticket purchase, or perhaps you wrote to someone who inadvertently revealed your location." Gabriella thought back, trying to remember if she'd sent any correspondence that might have betrayed her whereabouts. "I wrote to my mother's friend in Charlottesville, just to let her know I was safe, but I was vague about where I'd gone. Just said I was out west." That might have been enough, especially if Edward is as determined as this letter suggests. Preston guided her gently back to the bench. "The lawyer requests a response, asking if you would be willing to meet with a representative of the Hayes family." "No," Gabriella said immediately, fear sharpening her voice. "I won't see anyone connected to them." "You don't have to," Preston assured her. "You're under no obligation to meet with anyone or respond in any way. I can handle the correspondence. Tell them you have no interest in renewing contact." Relief flooded her, followed quickly by shame. "I'm sorry to involve you in this mess. It isn't fair to you." "Don't apologize," Preston said firmly. "You've done nothing wrong. And as for fair, what wouldn't be fair is allowing Edward or anyone else to disrupt the life you've built here." Tears welled in Gabriella's eyes. "I've been so happy these past months. I should have known it couldn't last." "Gabriella Hayes," Preston said, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his gaze. "Don't you dare start thinking that way. What we have isn't temporary or fragile. It won't be broken by a letter from some Richmond lawyer or by the past trying to claim you." The certainty in his voice steadied her. "What should we do?" "First, I'll draft a response making it clear that you have no wish for contact. I'll be polite but firm, nothing that could provoke further action." He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself before continuing. "But there's something else I've been wanting to ask you. Something I'd planned to do differently, with more romance than a bench in the public gardens on a sweltering evening." Confusion replaced fear as Gabriella watched Preston slide from the bench to one knee before her. "Preston, what are you? Marry me," he said simply, taking her hands in his. "I've known since that picnic by the river, maybe since the moment I saw you trembling in the sunset, that you're the woman I want to spend my life with. I love you, Gabriella. Not just your beauty or your kindness, but your courage and your strength. I love the way you've built a new life here, the way you've refused to let fear define you." Gabriella's heart thundered in her chest. "Preston, I was going to wait," he continued. "Save up for a proper ring, plan something special. But with this letter, I realize there's no reason to wait. If you'll have me, I want to make you my wife." Not to protect you from Edward, though I'd certainly do that with my dying breath, but because I can't imagine my future without you in it." Tears spilled freely down Gabriella's cheeks now, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Preston Novak, I will marry you." He surged to his feet, gathering her in his arms and lifting her clear off the ground in his exuberance. Their kiss was deeper than any they'd shared before, filled with promise and passion and the certainty of a shared future. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Preston pressed his forehead to hers. "I don't have a ring yet," he admitted. "But I promise." "I don't need a ring," Gabriella interrupted. "I just need you. You have me," he vowed, "now and always." They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, the threat from Virginia diminished by the joy of their engagement. Mrs. Tillman took one look at their faces and clapped her hands together. "Well, it's about time," she exclaimed. "When's the wedding?" Preston looked to Gabriella, eyebrows raised in question. "Soon," Gabriella answered decisively. "Very soon." They were married 3 weeks later in the small Methodist church, with Mrs. Tillman, Dr. Finch, Mr. Patterson, and half the town in attendance. Gabriella wore her green silk dress, freshly altered by Martha from the dress shop, with wildflowers in her hair. Preston wore his best suit and a smile that never dimmed, even when the preacher droned on longer than expected. The response to the Richmond lawyer was sent the day after their engagement, a brief note on Preston's official letterhead stating that Miss Hayes soon to be Mrs. Novak had no desire for communication with the Hayes family and considered all ties severed. If any further attempts at contact were made, they would be considered harassment of a law enforcement officer's wife. No reply came, and as summer gave way to fall, the shadow of Edward Hayes receded further into the past where it belonged. Their first home was a small but sturdy house on the edge of town, close enough for Preston to reach his office quickly if needed but far enough for privacy. They furnished it simply but comfortably, creating a haven that reflected both their tastes. Preston's practical solidity softened by Gabriella's eye for beauty. Married life suited them both. Gabriella continued working at Patterson's, though now as a full partner rather than an employee. Preston's duties as marshal kept him busy, but he made it a point to be home for supper each evening, hanging his gun belt by the door and leaving the weight of his responsibilities outside. Their first Christmas as husband and wife was a joyous affair, with Preston's mother visiting from Dallas and bringing handmade gifts for them both. The elder Mrs. Novak, a sturdy, practical woman with the same gray eyes as her son, took to Gabriella immediately. "You've done well for yourself, Preston," she declared after Gabriella had retired for the evening. "She's got spirit and sense, that one." "I know, Ma," he agreed, smiling fondly in the direction of their bedroom. "I'm a lucky man." When spring arrived again, bringing the bluebonnets to the hillsides, Gabriella had news of her own to share. She waited until they'd returned to the spot by the river where Preston had first declared his love, spreading their picnic blanket in the same place. "Do you remember what you said to me here?" she asked, nestling against his side as they watched the water flow. "That I was falling in love with you," Preston replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I was already past falling by then." Gabriella smiled, taking his hand and placing it gently against her still flat stomach. "I hope you have enough love for one more then." It took a moment for her meaning to register, but when it did, Preston's face transformed with wonder. "A baby. We're having a baby." She nodded, laughing as he whooped with joy and gathered her into a careful embrace. "Dr. Finch confirmed it yesterday. He thinks the baby will come in late November." "A baby," Preston repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child." He placed his hand reverently back on her stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your pa can't wait to meet you." Pregnancy agreed with Gabriella. As her body changed to accommodate their growing child, she blossomed with a new kind of confidence. The morning sickness passed quickly, leaving her with boundless energy that she channeled into preparing their home for the new arrival. Preston, for his part, became even more protective, though he tried not to hover too obviously. He took on an assistant deputy to lighten his workload, ensuring he could be home more regularly as Gabriella's time approached. The whole town seemed to celebrate with them. Mrs. Tillman organized a quilting bee to create a special blanket for the baby. Mr. Patterson insisted that Gabriella take a proper maternity leave with full pay. Even the mayor's wife, normally reserved in her interactions, presented Gabriella with a silver cup engraved with the baby's expected birth month. As November approached, the nursery was ready, a small room adjacent to their bedroom, painted a cheerful yellow and furnished with a cradle that Preston had crafted himself, working late into the evenings after Gabriella had gone to bed. "It's perfect," she said, running her hand along the smooth wooden rail. "Our child will be so loved." "Yes, he will," Preston agreed, his hand resting on the swell of her belly. They had taken to referring to the baby as he, though neither had a strong preference for a son over a daughter. "Or she," Gabriella reminded him with a smile. "Either way, I can't wait to meet this little person who's been kicking my ribs for the past month." Their child, however, had plans of his own. 2 weeks before the expected date, in the middle of a crisp November night, Gabriella woke to the first pains of labor. "Preston," she whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. "Preston, wake up. It's time." He was instantly alert, years of marshal's training making him a light sleeper. "The baby's coming. Are you sure?" In answer, Gabriella grimaced as another contraction tightened across her abdomen. "Very sure." What followed was a blur of activity. Preston sent the new deputy to fetch Dr. Finch while he helped Gabriella walk slowly around their bedroom, supporting her through each contraction as they grew stronger and closer together. Dr. Finch arrived just as dawn was breaking, his medical bag in hand and a calm confidence in his manner that reassured them both. "First babies often take their time," he told Preston when the younger man expressed concern at the hours passing. "Gabriella's strong and healthy. Trust the process." By midday, Gabriella was exhausted but determined. Preston had refused to leave her side, ignoring convention that dictated men should wait elsewhere during childbirth. "I'm staying," he had stated firmly when Dr. Finch suggested he might be more comfortable in the parlor. "Unless Gabriella wants me to go." "Stay," she had gasped between pains. "Please stay." And so he did, wiping her brow, supporting her back, and murmuring encouragement as she labored to bring their child into the world. When the final, overwhelming urge to push came, Preston held her hand so tightly that later they would both find bruises on their fingers. "One more push," Dr. Finch urged as the baby's head emerged. "That's it, Gabriella. You're doing wonderfully." With a final, superhuman effort, Gabriella bore down, and suddenly the room was filled with the indignant cry of new life. "A boy," Dr. Finch announced, holding up the squalling infant. "And a fine set of lungs on him, too." Preston's face was wet with tears as he kissed Gabriella's forehead. "You did it," he whispered. "You incredible, amazing woman. You did it." After cleaning and wrapping the baby, Dr. Finch placed him in Gabriella's arms. She stared down at the tiny face, taking in the tuft of dark hair, the miniature features that somehow combined her own and Preston's in perfect harmony. "Hello, Thomas," she said softly, using the name they had chosen for a boy. "Thomas James Novak." They had selected James as a middle name to honor Preston's father, whose memory still meant so much to him. "Thomas," Preston echoed, his finger gently tracing the baby's cheek. "Welcome to the world, son, as Dr. Finch bustled about, ensuring Gabriella was comfortable and giving instructions for her care in the coming days. Preston took his son in his arms for the first time. The baby's tiny hand curled reflexively around his father's finger, a grip surprisingly strong for one so new to the world. "I promise you something, Thomas," Preston said, his voice low enough that only the baby and perhaps Gabriella, drifting toward exhausted sleep, could hear. "You will never know the kind of fear your mother knew. You'll grow up in the light, not hiding from shadows. That's my vow to you both." The following years brought changes both expected and surprising. Thomas grew from a colicky infant into a sturdy toddler with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Gabriella returned to work at Patterson's, bringing the baby with her in a special cradle behind the counter until he was old enough to toddle among the store shelves, charming customers with his ready smile. Preston was promoted to county sheriff when his predecessor retired, a position that came with better pay but also greater responsibilities. He took to training a new generation of deputies with the same dedication he brought to fatherhood, determined to establish a law enforcement tradition based on justice rather than intimidation. Their little house on the edge of town eventually became too small, especially after the arrival of their daughter, Elena Rose, 2 years after Thomas's birth. They purchased land a little further out, building a comfortable home with room for their growing family and the occasional visits from Preston's siblings or his mother. Austin grew rapidly during those years, the sleepy town transforming into a bustling city. The Capitol building was completed, its pink granite dome visible for miles. Railroad lines expanded, bringing new residents and opportunities. Patterson's general store expanded too, with Gabriella overseeing the addition of a ladies' department that quickly became the most profitable section. Through it all, Preston and Gabriella's love deepened, weathering the challenges of parenthood, career advancement, and the ordinary trials of life with a steadfast commitment to each other. The shadows of Gabriella's past receded completely, becoming nothing more than distant memories that no longer held power to frighten her. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston surprised Gabriella with a special gift: the deed to a small plot of land by the river, the very spot where they had shared their first kiss, and where she had told him about Thomas's impending arrival. "It's ours now," he told her as they stood beneath the same live oak, now a decade older and more majestic. Thomas and Elena were exploring the riverbank under the watchful eye of Preston's deputy and his wife, who had become close family friends over the years. "What will we do with it?" Gabriella asked, tracing the boundaries described in the deed. "Whatever you want," Preston replied. "Build a cabin for summer retreats. Leave it natural for the children to explore. I just wanted to make sure this place that means so much to us would always be ours." Gabriella smiled, her heart full. At 33, she was no longer the frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Austin. Life had etched fine lines at the corners of her eyes and threaded an occasional strand of silver through her dark hair, but it had also given her confidence and joy beyond anything she could have imagined that first day. "You remember what you said to me when we first met?" she asked, leaning into Preston's embrace. He smiled, the gesture crinkling the corners of his eyes in the way she loved. "You were trembling, afraid of your own shadow. And you told me to stand in your light instead," she finished. "I didn't understand then what a gift you were offering." "The gift was yours to give, Gabriella," he corrected gently. "You chose to trust again. You chose to step into the light. I just happened to be standing there, ready to catch you if you stumbled." She turned in his arms to face him fully. At 40, Preston had matured like fine whiskey, his features more defined, streaks of gray at his temples adding a distinguished air to his rugged good looks. The badge on his chest caught the sunlight, gleaming with the same steadfast promise he had always embodied. "I love you, Preston Novak," she said simply. "More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "And I love you, Gabriella Novak," he replied, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown that first time under this very tree, until the shadows fade and the stars go out. Their children's laughter drifted up from the riverbank, a joyful counterpoint to the rustling leaves and flowing water. As Gabriella and Preston walked hand in hand to join them, she thought about the long journey from fear to love, from shadow to light. She had arrived in Austin afraid of her own shadow, but in Preston's steady light, she had found not just safety but the courage to cast a light of her own. Together, they had built a life that shone bright enough to banish any darkness, creating a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. And for Gabriella Hayes Novak, once a frightened girl from Virginia, that was the greatest triumph of all.